Assalamu alaikum. Yes, so my presentation is going to be a bit different from what you heard of. You know, it's nothing related to lab work. It's part of what I did. I successfully defended my PhD about 3 months ago. So this is part of what I did for my PhD. The entire PhD looked at dietary practices of Ghanaians living in Europe. So I had data from the UK, London and Greater Manchester. I also had data from the Netherlands and Germany, as well as data from Ghana. It was a mixed method study, but today's presentation is just going to focus on a small aspect of something I did that was embedded in the qualitative study. So yeah, the title is Perceptions of Food Insecurity, and I realize that not everyone here must know about what food insecurity is, so I'm going to give you a brief background into the concept. So food insecurity is a concept that first evolved in 1948. At the time, it was just related to the idea of the fundamental right of every human being to food. In 1978, a definition emerged, and the emphasis was on availability. So the idea that everyone must have, there should be enough food available in the world. A decade later, the definition changed again, and this time there was emphasis on access to food. So now it became availability and access to food as well. The recent definition was at the World Food Summit in 1996, and they defined it as food security existing when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. So you realize that over the last 4 decades, its definition or the whole thing has emerged. Despite these changes, it still remains as a complex concept. It's however based on 3 main pillars. So like I explained, availability of food, accessibility of food, and utilization. Each of these individual terminologies is also really loaded. So when you talk about accessibility, it's not just about having the financial access to be able to buy food, but it also refers to geographical access. How close are people to buying healthy foods? It also includes terms like food deserts and things like that. Utilization is also relates to so many things. One of them is biological utilization, as in when people eat food, is the body really able to absorb the nutrients? It also refers to things like, do people have enough knowledge on healthy eating? And more recently, another term has been added to it known as stability or sustainability. So usually if any of these, one of these terms is not met, you know, so you need to have all 3. There should be food available. You should be able to have access to food before you say one is food secure. I hope that is clear. And as I said, it's really a complex concept. It's still a challenge. You know, the measurement of food insecurity is still a challenge for researchers. It's, however, major public health issue because it's associated with poor health. When I started my PhD and I first presented my proposal, and I told them I was also interested in food insecurity as part of what I was looking at, you know, as part of the drivers of food behaviors among Ghanaian migrants. I had people asking me questions like, why would you want to look at food insecurity when it's an issue only for people in low-income countries? People don't realize that it's something that is also a big problem in high-income countries as well. It's associated with high levels of poverty. And then research has shown that minority groups or ethnic minority groups tend to have high levels of poverty as compared to people from the host country, and therefore at risk of food insecurity. A lot of research has gone on in countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia, and findings have shown that it is a big problem among people from minority ethnic groups. But in the UK, very little is known about, you know, migrant groups and their food insecurity situation. I focus on Ghanaians first of all because I'm Ghanaian myself. But then aside that, when you look at migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, you realize that most of them in the UK tend to be Ghanaians. You know, there's a large number of Ghanaians here in the UK. Now, given the complex, you know, the fact that it's really difficult to understand the concept of food insecurity, this was my objective for that aspect, to explore the influence of social and economic factors in shaping dietary practices among Ghanaians living in Greater Manchester. It wasn't possible to just ask participants that, do you think you're food secure? Or, so I had to probe about their food situation. So using those concepts, find out what people's food situations are. Do they think they have available, enough food around? Do they have access to healthy foods? If not, what were the barriers and facilitators to accessing healthy foods? And also find out things like for low-income households, how were they able to cope or to be able to eat well given their circumstances? So, as I said earlier, the whole PhD was a mixed method study, but for this part, it's a qualitative study that I use a purposive sampling. I interviewed 31 people in 29 interviews because 2 of them were couples. All my participants were 25 years and above, so 25 years to 70 years. I transcribed everything, the transcripts verbatim and coded in NVivo for people who are familiar with qualitative research. And then I used the 5 steps in framework analysis to do my analysis. This approach allows you to use a priori and emerging themes. A priori in the sense that you already have things in your mind, so concepts in your mind that you're trying to explore. So I looked out for those 3 concepts: availability, accessibility, and utilization. And emerging themes just allows you to look at the data and see what else is coming out from the data. And I did data management and analysis concurrently. So that's just a map of Greater Manchester. So participants were from all over Greater Manchester. Another reason why I did it in Greater Manchester is because it has high levels of poverty as compared to other parts of England, and food insecurity is directly linked to poverty. There are lots of Ghanaians who also reside in Greater Manchester, so it was an ideal setting to conduct this kind of study. This is just a table showing characteristics of the participants who participated in my study. So as you can see, it was a mixture of males and females. There was also people who were from low socioeconomic status as well as high socioeconomic status. That was based on their education and their occupation. Ideally, this study should have just been focused on people from low-income households, but because the overall aim of the PhD was not on food insecurity, it was on dietary behaviors and their drivers, it was important to get perspectives from people of high income as well. And then the duration of stay in the UK also differed. There were some who had lived here for over 20 years and some who had lived here for less than 10 years. There were some students, there were some retired people, different kinds of occupations among the participants. Now, this is just a summary of the themes that I used for the analysis. So the ones you see on your left are the a priori themes that were based on the pillars of food security, and then the ones on your right are the emerging themes. So based on everything that I found, I had 2 big themes. One was perceived buffers to food insecurity, and then the second one was perceived risk factors and challenges to food insecurity. I'll be talking more on the risk factors in my next slides. So I need to mention that most participants that I interviewed did not perceive themselves to be food insecure. However, a few of them acknowledged the fact that there were people within the Ghanaian community who were food insecure. And then they associated this with things like temporal unemployment, with people who had financial problems, immigration problems, and things like that. There was a lot of emphasis on financial pressure as well. And I'm going to be reading out some of the quotes. So if you look at the second one where I put financial remittances, that's a theme. So there were 2 points that were raised, and I'm going to read that. Someone said, but our main issue is money. Our money is not enough because the money is not for us alone. We have people at home we have to take care of. We have to pay bills, and the bills are too much, and we have kids we have to cater for. So this was in the context of talking about healthy eating. So someone explains that because of the financial pressure to remit at home, they have to make the choice of eating unhealthy and sending money home. The other one was more an optional thing, because another person says, I know so many Ghanaians that eat food frugally here, and yet you see the houses they are building back home, and you'll be amazed. It's sad. So this is like a choice thing. People decide to spend money on building fancy buildings, back at home, and that affects their dietary choices here in the UK. The first one that has to do with utilization was with reference to healthy eating. Someone says, I think we Ghanaians in the UK are okay. It's eating healthy that we have a problem with. We get food to eat, and the problem is eating healthy. So as I explained to you, if food is available and you're not eating healthy, it's an indication of food insecurity. So a lot of people think there's a lot of food here and we get food to eat, but they don't really care about eating healthy. There are other quotes that I want to read. So other challenges that participants mentioned had to do with pride and the fear of being stigmatized. So whilst we were having the interviews, the issue of going to food banks emerged, because here in the UK, people who are food insecure are helped with food from the food banks. So I wanted to know if that was something Ghanaians used, people on low income. And someone said it's a matter of pride. It's not in our culture to go to places to look for food. People will think, what if I'm seen? Then another person says, it's common. The person was referring to the idea of food insecurity. The person thinks it is a problem among Ghanaian migrants. But we Ghanaians have the mentality that if we go to queue for food, it is demeaning. And if people see you, they would gossip about you. Therefore, even if someone is on benefit, she'll buy cheap, unhealthy foods rather than to go to the food banks. Now, the issue of going to food banks and whether the foods served there are healthy or unhealthy is another debate. But even if we assume that it was healthy, this quote shows that people will not be willing to use these given the fear of stigma that is associated with going to food banks. Sorry. I'm briefly going to touch on the other theme that was perceived buffers to food insecurity. Do I have time? Okay. So I just developed this conceptual framework to summarize that. So I'm not going to give any quotes, just going to briefly talk about it. Because I already mentioned that a lot of participants did not perceive themselves as food insecure, and this is why they thought they were food secure. So the cultural identity, being Ghanaian, and religious beliefs, because most of them were Christians, it wasn't only a few who were Muslim, according to participants, obligates the whole Ghanaian community to provide social support. And this support could come from, social networks that could be close family and friends based on trust and reciprocity. Sorry, I don't have a pointer to point at what I'm talking about, but I hope you are following. And the social support that they talked about could come, the channel was usually through the social groups in Greater Manchester. So we have the Ghana Union. There are so many social groups based on ethnicity, so people from this area, people from that area, or the church, because a lot of people talked about the church being a channel for social support. And then the support could be in the form of just giving someone money. People mentioned we do that for ourselves. When I need money, I can just call a friend and ask. And it could also be the church had food banks that they provided food for people who were needy. It's funny because people will not use the official channels, the food banks that is by the government, but if it's in the church, then they would use it. Or it could also just be in the form of people providing accommodation. If someone needs accommodation, you could just provide a room for the person. And these things were perceived to buffer food insecurity, because of the social support. So that's how I summarized why most people felt this was not a big issue among Ghanaians. Now, what does all this mean? First of all, there is some acknowledgement that food insecurity does exist among Ghanaians, mainly challenges related to food accessibility and utilization, so mainly healthy eating, and that should be a concern for public health specialists or professionals. There's also evidence that food insecurity is buffered by the social support provided among Ghanaians. So as researchers, that should be of interest to us, because social support is a good resource to use for interventions. And then food insecure households may be reluctant to make use of food banks for the fear of gossip and pride. Like I mentioned earlier, paradoxically, this reluctance does not extend to close family network or stuff like that. Now, what are the implications for research and policy? Food insecurity might be difficult to detect amongst Ghanaian migrants if people within the community do not make use of formal services. These services are there to help people like that, but for this community, because of the fear of stigma and all that, they might not use it at all. Now, the social support that they talked about, it's a good thing, but we do not know whether the resources of these social groups, including the churches, meets the needs of some of these, low-income households. And if not, how can we as researchers help such people? How can we target people who actually need support? Now, this is a qualitative study. It's just based on perceptions, so it might not be able to capture all the pillars of food insecurity very well. So we recommend future survey-based research to be able to access food insecurity well. Then finally, there were a lot of talks about food management and coping strategies that I don't present here, but what are the implications of some of these food management and coping strategies that participants talked about for diet quality and overall health? So thank you. Any questions?
Jazakallah. Any questions from the lady side?
Thank you for that presentation. I found it really interesting. You mentioned that ethnic minorities are at more risk of food insecurity in the UK, and I wondered why that might be.
Well, so there's a lot of research that has shown that they have high levels of poverty. And with regards to people from sub-Saharan, I'll speak from that because that's what I've been looking at. It has to do with issues when people come. Sometimes they don't have proper immigration status, so they are not able to find jobs. They are not able to enroll into the educational system to find themselves jobs. So that's the main issue with people from sub-Saharan Africa, and that's why they tend to have high levels of poverty compared to people from the host country.
Any more questions from the ladies?
Yes. Assalamualaikum, Jazakallah for the talk. I was wondering, you said that because people have problems with getting jobs and because their immigration status, they are sort of insecure in terms of food. Does that make a difference when you have people from sort of higher social backgrounds, like people who have degrees or educated? Does it make a difference to attitudes in terms of food when you see people who are from the sub-Saharan region but they are educated? Yeah.
Thank you for that question. So yeah, that's why my PhD, I mentioned that even though this is on food insecurity, I sampled both low income and high income, or higher socioeconomic status, as a driver or a determinant of dietary behavior. Yes, socioeconomic status has been found to be associated with dietary behaviors. There's a direct link. Usually people of higher education tend to eat more healthy foods. But having said that, there's always, some exceptions. Some people, it's not because they don't know. Some people just might not want to eat healthy foods due to taste and other things. The whole idea of dietary practices, it's a complex thing. Understanding dietary practices is not straightforward. There's so many things that come into play. So you cannot just single out socioeconomic status. It's a complex thing that has to do with an interrelationship with several factors. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay.
I've got a couple of questions on the men's side. The first one's a quick one. What is belly food that you referred to in your talk?
Oh, yes. So, did I mention, did you see belly food in there? Okay, yes. So, participants said that it was in one of the quotes, and they said that Ghanaians tend to eat belly food, and their explanation for that was food that just makes you full. So someone said we are more interested in getting full, and not about looking for healthy food. As long as I'm full and you are full, as long as the belly is it okay now? As long as the belly is full, we are good to go. So and that had implications for health, because it's just about, you don't think about whether you're going to be healthy or not. You just needed to fill your tummy. That's what they meant by belly food.
Exactly. We've got another question from Mahbooba Rahman Sahib down here. He says, doesn't the manufacture of genetically modified food indicate that there is a universally perceived insecurity about food?
Sorry, can you repeat that question again?
So the question is about the fact that there's genetically modified food now.
Yeah.
And is this an indicator that there is a generally perceived insecurity about food?
Yes. So that's a debate that we can start now and go on and on. So there's that discussion still ongoing, with some people saying there's a lot of food to feed everyone in the world, but the problem is access. I can't give you a direct answer to that, because that discussion is still ongoing. I have my views about that. I also think there's a lot of food in the world today, and the issue is more on access rather than distribution. Is that okay to give you my opinion about that question? Because that is a big debate still ongoing.
Okay, Jazakallah, we'll pick that up after the session then. So,
Okay.
Jazakallah, Dr. Hibba.